Hello and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. I feel like our last episode was so recent, but it's already been a few weeks. So we're just so excited to be back today. We have another guest with us today, Dr. Danielle Jones. So as people are trickling in, do you want to share a little bit about your background and a little bit about what you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, welcome everybody, and thank you, Swati, for allowing me to have a little time with the audience and just to share a little bit of my story. Before I get started, though, I do have to do a legal disclaimer. So, the words that I'm about to express in this presentation are my own and not necessarily reflect those of Amgen. Now we got that out the way, we can talk. um, so, um, I am a pharmacist by training, clinical pharmacist by training. I have been in industry for a little over 5 years now. So I started my matriculation to pharmacy. I went to Spelman College, got a BS in chemistry, and then went to the University of Tennessee, obtained my PharmD. Now, from there, I won't tell you the year that I graduated, but I will say that I did 13 years in retail and managed a store for 9.5 years. So from there, it was during COVID time, and I was, a little burnt out as a lot of us are when it comes to working retail and having those long hours. And I was like, I've always knew about the MSL role, but I didn't know anybody who was actually an MSL. So I did what most other people do. I reached out to my internal network and I simply asked the question, is anybody in my network an MSL? And if you are, can I talk to you? And when that happened, I was able to connect with people I had never met in my entire life. I mean, I was on LinkedIn, I was on Facebook asking questions from people, and I was introduced to a career coach. And that career coach then helped to form and shape my resume, helped me to understand the MSL role, and thus led me to my first MSL job, which was now 5 years ago. So that's kind of a long story short of how I started. My story is not unique. I know many people ask, how did you transition from retail and how did you figure out, the MSL role? I mean, literally, I will say it is a lot of networking. It's a lot of hard work. It is investing in yourself and putting the time in, because there is a very distinct difference than what you do in a retail or hospital setting than what you do when you come into industry. And so I know we'll get into a lot of that here later, but that's kind of a long story short of where I am today.
Amazing. And so for those people who are just dipping their feet in, they're just starting to learn about what an MSL is. Could you break down, what it is that you do and how you would define what an MSL is?
So the MSL role is very complex. I mean, it does vary from company to company, but however, the core principles are the core principles. So you initially do need to have the scientific acumen and have the ability to communicate scientific data and information. That is something that we as pharmacists do every day when it comes to counseling patients, when it comes to connecting with providers and talking to PBMs. You are constantly doing this every single day. And so you have to be able to communicate to, i.e., a hiring manager, if you're trying to transition out, that the scientific data is the scientific data, and you have to be able to communicate that in a clear, concise way. Not only do you have to do it in a clear, concise way, but you also have to be non-biased. It is not your research. It is not it is not your paper. You are not the author on the paper. You are simply there to present the data as it is written and published. That is it. You allow the provider to make the decision on what they want to do with the information that you provided for them. So with that, you do have to be current. You cannot provide old data because data and science is changing on a daily basis, especially if you're in some of these higher impact therapeutic areas. Some of your other therapeutic areas, the science has not changed very much in the last couple of years. There may be some newer publications, maybe just some updates. But depending on the therapeutic area that you are interested in, i.e. oncology, that changes very quickly. And so you have to be clear, you have to be concise, you have to be current, and then you have to be relatable. Essentially, this job is all about relationship building and having a trust. You want your providers to be able to call you if they have a question about a patient, or if they have had an adverse event, or they're trying to work through whatever networks or PBMs they have to work through, or if they're interested in going to conferences and congresses. They want to be able to talk to you about what's the latest and greatest thing, how can they get into either conference or congress, maybe even being the speaker for your company, being on an ad board for your company. Those are the types of conversations and relationship building that you have to be able to have, and have a trust factor, and knowing that they can trust you with that type of information, and that you are going to be able to relay that information back to your company. Now, the currency when it comes to MSL role is all about your insights. The only way that you are going to get quality insights from your providers, and they're not just looking at you stone faced, is if you actually talk to them and let them talk. I always tell people the main thing about the MSL role is that you listen more than you speak. You ask those open-ended questions, but your job is to gain the insight. You don't data dump. You don't just provide a whole bunch of stats and charts and Kaplan-Meier plots. All those things are wonderful. However, your job is to listen. And when you're listening intently and listening for a purpose, those are the good quality insights that help to shape medical strategy. And that's what gives you your credibility with the company.
Amazing. That was great. And I have so many follow-up questions about so many of the aspects that you talked about. So, what would you say to someone who is, they're an aspiring, industry professional? They might be a clinician, they might be in academia, they have a PhD, a PharmD, or an MD. So someone who would qualify to be an MSL, but they're looking at MSL roles, but they're also looking at sales roles. How would you differentiate those two?
So they're very, very different, but you do have a common goal. So I will always say this: your common goal, regardless if you're sales or commercial or your medical affairs, is the patient. So as long as you keep the patient first, you're always going to do the right thing, no matter if you do sales or you go into medical affairs. Now, with sales, of course, there's a difference in the way that they have a communication with the provider versus how you as a medical affairs professional will have a communication with the provider. Sales is going to keep it very high level, very generic. They can only speak what's on the PI meaning package insert. They are not allowed, nor should you ever hear a commercial partner talking off label. That is where you come in as a medical professional. You are able to speak to off label studies and off label research that may provide a little bit more clarity to your providers so they can make sound clinical judgment. But that is really the main difference. I mean, there are some other nuances when it comes to like dinners and things of that nature that are kind of like in the minutia. But the clear difference is that you can speak off label where a sales counterpart cannot. You can provide clinical data where a sales counterpart can only speak to what is approved and branded by the company.
Yes, definitely. And so if anyone has, I see there are quite a few people here live. So if anyone has any questions for Dr. Danielle Jones on her experience, on her background as, her, what she's doing day in, day out as a full-time MSL, please do not hesitate to drop that in the chat. And as we see questions come in, we'll be answering them. We do have some others that we know that people will appreciate. So we will also ask those, if we don't see things populating in the chat, but do not hesitate. We want this to be as engaging as possible. We are just getting started and warming up with a few questions on our end, but whatever questions are on your mind, that's why we're here today, and whatever we can do to answer them, we're happy to do that. So as we're waiting for some questions to populate in the chat, I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, now that you've started off with being an MSL and you've been promoted, what in your opinion makes you or makes anyone a successful MSL? What are like the 3 traits, would you say, that make a successful MSL?
So it does vary from company to company. I will say, in my general opinion, this is just a high level kind of top down approach, is that you definitely have to show scientific acumen. You have to be able to demonstrate that you understand your therapeutic area day in, day out, because that's why you are getting paid. You're getting paid to be the scientific expert. And then secondly, you do have to show that you are moving the needle. When I say that, I'm saying that you have to be able to show that you are taking your providers in your territory on a journey, and it has to be clear. This is a scientific journey. When I tell people that you should not data dump, you should start from wherever the provider is and take them on a journey to where you want to lead them, and be able to understand and recognize where each provider is in their journey. So that's key. Last and certainly not least, there are certain nuances that you have to navigate when it comes to industry. It's a big corporation. You're not immune to it. Everybody, it is what it is. There's a corporate kind of way that you have to kind of adapt to and show your worth within the company and to your managers, and take on special projects, be leaders. Like, for instance, I was a conference lead. I am the lead for new innovation in our resources. I've mentored numerous of new hires. I have also led our training sessions for our new hires. And so those are the type of leadership roles within the company that you can show your manager that you are able and willing to help out, be projects, take on some of those stretch roles, and be successful in those stretch roles as well. And that's some of the ways that you can move up the ladder.
Wonderful. And we have tons of questions coming in the chat. So let's start with a few of those. So starting from the top, from a hiring manager's perspective, what makes a candidate stand out, both in their application materials and in an interview? Great question.
Great question. So I will say and I'm doing an interview next week for some people. So the thing that we are looking for, and once again, it varies from team to team. So the thing that I would always ask if I am going on an interview with a hiring manager is, what type of team member do you need? And let me say it like this. There are some teams that are very academic. They have a lot of PhDs, they have a lot of MDs who are just straight science people, and they are not very good communicators. We have some teams that have a whole lot of good communicators. However, they kind of lack the scientific acumen needed in order to have a really good scientific conversation. Now, if you're a good manager, you kind of have a mixture of both. You have some people who can be strong, who can help some of the academics out. Then you have some of the academics who can help some of the more conversational team members out. So you definitely want to ask your hiring manager, what team member or what is it on the team that you need, because that will vary from team to team, therapeutic area to therapeutic area. Because there are certain therapeutic areas, and I use oncology because it is so robust, that the conversation with those providers, they don't care about the conversation. They want to hear the science and they want you to get out of there. Now, if you're in dermatology, or if you're in like body con, where it's like a little less stringent, where nobody's typically, on their deathbed, essentially, then that team may need somebody who is have a little bit more fluff to them, a little bit more conversation, a little bit more personality. So it does vary from team to team, and it does vary from therapeutic area to therapeutic area. And so it really is imperative for you to ask what is needed for your team, what type of candidate are you looking for, and you essentially need to mirror whatever it is that the hiring manager has told you. Another thing that you can do, ask the team. I mean, I've had so many people, we have an opening, who saw an opening on our team, who has reached out and said, hey, what type of team member do y'all need? Do you need academic? Do you need somebody who's more conversational? Depends on the therapeutic area. If you're in the South, you may not have to be as stringent and, super robust and all this stuff on the science. But if you're in the Northeast, you have like your Harvards and your Yales and your, Princetons or whatever. Those type of academic institutions require a different type of personality. So it does vary. So it's hard to say that there is a one size fit all answer, because it does vary from region to region and therapeutic areas as well. Now in an interview, I will say, somebody told me this a long time ago. It's kind of like you're on a date. You definitely want the person to invite you back. You want to also be just conversational enough where they would want to invite you out for a drink. And so there has to be a level of engagement, authenticity, because we have seen boring interviews and we are like, okay, they're great on paper, but if I put them in front of a room of 50 people, are they going to bore everybody to death and nobody will come back to the program? So great on paper, but unfortunately your presentation skills just don't match. And unfortunately, we would pass on somebody who may not be as academically strong as a candidate, but if they can keep our attention and be engaging, then we will give them a chance, because at the end of the day, we teach you the science. We will teach you everything you need to know. So you don't have to worry. Like every scientific paper, we will teach you about it. We'll have a conversation about it. So you don't have to worry about the science. That's something I can teach, but I cannot teach personality.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the other thing I would add too is that even when you're sending out your application, Danielle, you hit this a little bit, but I want to drive it home even more, is that if you see a job posting, not only applying on the website, but also looking on LinkedIn to see, and LinkedIn is incredible. I always say this, there's a search bar. You can literally search for the company. And then under the people category in the company, you can search for Medical Science Liaison. And then in that, you can find like, okay, who is in the cardiometabolic team? And you can find someone in that team and get the insider scoop on what's going on, asking the question, like you mentioned, like what sort of team member are you looking for? So it's not only just submitting your applications into the ether, it's also pairing that with, this kind of personal connection. And then if you all hit it off, like I definitely would not suggest, if it's the first time you're meeting, to ask them to put in a referral, but they may offer it. And that's something I can say from personal experience. I did this exact thing, and someone put in a personal referral, and they said at the end of the call, like, I'm so happy to refer you for this. You'd be a great fit. But I didn't ask for it. I just demonstrated my value in the call with the questions that I asked, and then they were able to put in a referral. So that's something to consider. Every company does referrals super differently. So some companies, I'm learning recently, or in the last few years, like they don't even look at referrals. Other ones, it's like a huge deal to get a referral and it puts you to the top of the list. So totally depends the company. I won't call any out right now, but every company does it very differently. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is, for every single application you're sending out, I suggest just tweaking your resume just a little bit every time, because one thing that you'll notice when you start applying to different companies, again, this is so company specific, some companies don't even call it an MSL. Some companies call it a thought leader liaison or a key opinion leader advisor. Yeah, exactly. And so I would definitely ensure that if you are putting, experiences that speak to KOL management, so key opinion leader management, or the fact that you spoke to healthcare providers or worked cross-functionally across different departments, see the terminology they put in the job description and just copy and paste, do a Control F replace, and just replace all those same, like acronyms and those same terms with the way the company speaks. Because even before you get a hiring manager interview, you're going to go through a random algorithm. Okay, but you're going to go through an algorithm. And when you go through the algorithm, they're going to be looking for those key terms. And if you have KOL everywhere, but they actually call it a TL or a thought leader or some equivalent, then you're not even going to make it to the hiring manager stage because you're not speaking their language. So you have to do a little bit of that background research to understand, okay, is this resume even going to get past the AI algorithm even before I speak to a hiring manager, or even before that, an HR person. So those are just some additional things, like from a tangible perspective, that I would add.
Oh yeah, I would definitely say I have at least 4 different versions of my resume.
Yeah.
And I will say that, and great points that you just made. Another thing I would add to that, cut out anything that's not pertinent to the role that you're applying for. If you're applying for a nephrology role, I do not care what you did in cardiometabolics, unless it was medical affairs related. Now, if it was medical affairs related, that's great. But if you did all this work in a hospital or you worked in a retail setting, don't really care. You're not looking for a retail job. I'm looking to hire you as a medical affairs counterpart. So please, 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 please cut out anything that's fluff that is not pertinent to the role that you want. And that was really the best advice somebody gave me when I was applying, because my resume read as though I was still applying to be a pharmacy manager somewhere. And the lead MSL director at a company took one look at it and said, "You have 24 hours to fix it." She said, "I loved you in person. I love having a conversation with you, but you have 24 hours to resubmit your resume to me." And guess what I did? I resubmitted my resume.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, this is incredible. And it actually leads into another question that was asked, is like, it looks like this person comes from a pharmacy background. And so since you came from retail pharmacy without specific therapeutic residency or area expertise, how did you highlight or land your first therapeutic area? I love this question. I have really strong opinions on this question. So would love to have you start, because this is literally exactly what you did. And then I'll add my 2 cents.
So I will say that as a retail pharmacist or even a hospital pharmacist, you are doing the MSL role. You just don't know how to communicate it. You're actually doing it. You're having scientific conversation. You're reading scientific data. You're relaying that information to HCP, which could be called a KOL, or one company I called it the EE. We call OLs, opinion leaders, whatever the case may be. But you read the data, you present it, you let them make a clinical judgment, and then you go on with it. You're doing the MSL role. And every time I talk to a pharmacist, I'm like, you're doing the actual work. You just have to learn how to put the pieces together for a hiring manager to show them and demonstrate that you understand the things that you are doing on a daily basis do transfer into industry. That is it. You're doing it. You're actually doing the work. Now, the only thing I will say that you're probably not doing is being able to connect the dots. Now, what we're not going to do in an interview is connect the dots for you. You do have to be very clear and be very concise and put the pieces together for hiring managers in order for them to be able to say, okay, they know what they're doing. They know how to transition that into an MSL role. I don't necessarily have to teach that or coach them into that. That's the thing. You're doing every single thing that we would do, except for you're doing it in multiple therapeutic areas. The only thing I have to worry about is the kidneys. I don't have to worry about anything else in the body. I only talk about one specific part of the body, and that is it. You have to talk about it in multiple contexts to multiple different people in a literally 15-minute span. And you have to go from cardiology to dermatology to neurology all in the same afternoon. So you can easily, if you get the right person to help you connect the dots, you're doing the work. You just have to be able to put it together so somebody else will understand that you know what you're doing.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because I hear so many pharmacists, especially those who didn't do a residency, and they feel stuck in retail. And I'm like, do you understand you are kind of a Jack or Jill of all trades, because you can apply to nearly every therapeutic area that you are touching or interacting with? The only thing is, going back to the previous, comment that we both made before, if you are sending out your resume to a cardiometabolic role, then a nephrology role, then a dermatology role, ensure that you have a different version of your resume to speak to this is the one specifically where this company calls it a KOL, this company calls it an MSL, and this company specifically, this role is for nephrology. And so you are like checking all of those specific boxes that when you send it, you'll go past the algorithm and you'll be able to demonstrate how you can be effective in that particular therapeutic area. But honestly, it's like pharmacists, internal medicine, physicians, family medicine, like the ones that see so many therapeutic areas really lend itself to an amazing opportunity to cast such a wide net. But also there's amazing things too. If you did a residency in cardiology, then you can be like the top of the pile because you're like, okay, not only did I do a residency, but I have so much therapeutic expertise and I've stayed up to date on like everything going on in this space. In addition, if you're staying in that same region, you already have connections with other providers in that region, which is
all the time. You work in the hospital with the top doctors. You name drop. I name drop so many people from the hospital, even though I hadn't worked with them in 5 years. I was like, oh yes, I have a very and I did have a very good relationship when I was there. But I was like, oh yes, I have a very close relationship with this doctor, that doctor. You are speaking to the top KOLs or the top opinion leaders who we as MSLs are trying to get connections with. So if I wouldn't do anything else, I would form those bonds now and keep them strong and keep them tight because you're going to need them when you start talking to these hiring managers and you want to sell yourself and say, I have been in this space in Tampa, Florida, and I know all the top physicians in Tampa, Florida, because guess what? This is where I've been for the past 10 years. I work with the top docs in the hospital. I've talked to everybody in the community. I know all the surgeons. And you already have your internal network. That's your audience. That's half the battle of what we do as MSL is identifying key people in our therapeutic area. You've already got a leg up.
Absolutely. Yep. Amazing. So someone's asking, what career coach did you use? So this actually feeds into another question I wanted to ask about, what was the pivotal moment that really helped you land your first role? Was it coaching, mentorship? What program did you do? Would love to hear about that.
So it was a combination of everything. So I'm not going to say it's one thing that led to the other. I will say that preparation plus opportunity equals success. And so in preparation, I did use the MSL Academy when it was called a different name way back when, but now it's transformed into MSL Academy. And I took it very seriously. I mean, I spent my money on it. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I had the support of my husband at the time, and he was like, look, do whatever you need to do. And so I went full throttle. I was listening to podcasts. I was engaging in conversation with all the societies and MAPS and things of that nature. At the time, I wasn't able to attend MAPS, but I was able to listen in on some sessions on virtual because at the time it was during COVID. So a lot of things were online at the time. So
they have a bunch of recordings on their website for free, by the way. So I would check those out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, check it out. Get on there. MSL Talk. I was on that. I listened to that every single night on my way home from my retail job and on my way in. And so that in combination with that, and to be perfectly honest, I was at the right place at the right time because my hiring manager at the time, and I tell this story because you never ever want to burn a bridge because you never know what bridge you might have to walk back over when you need to cross over to the other side. The hiring manager was friends with a guy that I trained years ago. And they were friends in pharmacy school. I didn't even know they knew each other. But as you know, the world is 1 degree of separation. It was one call to say, hey, she was my manager. She trained me. She was awesome. And I mean, I got him to where he was in the company. And he was like, if you don't hire her, you're crazy. And that was how I got my interview. Now I still had to ace my interview and I still had to do a presentation and all that wonderful things. But networking, and I'm going to tell you guys, networking. You never ever want to leave anybody with a bad taste in their mouth about you because you never know who that person may be on the next end of your interview. who knows and who don't know anybody. Like in real life, this community is very small. I'm very sure that just everybody in this room, somebody knows somebody or has a connection with somebody that somebody else knows. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you never know who you're going to meet. You always have to give them just your genuine heart. Be as good as you can and as nice as you can. Be as authentic as you can, because that could come back and get you. So I'm always agree that, people forget what you say, people forget how, what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. It's what I end every interview with. When everybody asks me what my mantra is, they'll forget all my stats, they'll forget, how efficacious my drug is, they'll forget all of my safety data, but did I make them feel comfortable with using my product or coming to me if they have an issue? That's key.
Absolutely. And this leads into another great question. So, what's the most rewarding part of your job, or what gives you the most job satisfaction?
Well, I will say this. In retail, and it's very different, because I love my patients. I did. I had a great time. I wouldn't stay there for 9.5 years if I was completely unhappy. I would never ever say that. I had a great staff. I hired a great team around me. We were very engaged in the patients in our community. And that was great. But once you get into an industry role, you realize that the impact that you have globally on millions of patients, it's something that it's hard to even quantify or kind of understand until you get into it and you start seeing movement of your drug. I mean, granted, we are not here to sell a product. However, the company is, they have to make a profit. And the only way you can see how, good your science is if people are using your drug. It just is what it is, right? But the impact that you have globally and the amount of patients you can reach just beyond your community, beyond your hospital setting, it's one of those things that it just gives you a feeling that you are making a difference in thousands of patients' lives. If you get into the research and you get into the science and you really start talking about it and you really get into these like international conferences, and these are the thought leaders who are writing guidelines, and the stuff that you're talking about gets into a guideline, you're like, whoa, this is insane. Like, granted, I love once again, I love my patients. I don't care to touch anybody anymore. I don't care to give a vaccine anymore. I am okay with not ever doing that a day in my life. But having that connection and being able to shape guidelines, that's something pretty powerful.
It really is. Yeah, that's awesome. And now we're hopping back actually to a question about the interview process. So,
Mhm.
how many pages is the right amount for a CV or a resume?
I would say, and it varies. Now, if you have a lot of publications and you want to, submit, supplemental of all your publications, that's great. Please don't put on the resume. We'll ask you for your supplemental if we care about it, if it's pertinent to our therapeutic area. Two, maybe three. But yeah, 2 to 3 is a lot, is enough for us to get a general sense of who you are. I do not necessarily care what you did 10 years ago unless it was very pertinent to this role. So I will say, and even with my resume is very strong in medical affairs. I have maybe a blurb of what I did for the last 13 years in retail pharmacy, because that's not what my job, that's not what I want. That's not a job I'm looking for. So I maybe put 4 or 5 little bullet points, but I have 10 to 15 on each one of my medical affairs roles. And once again, they're very tailored to what the job I want
Yeah,
next. So
definitely.
to nephrology, then I used to be a clinical pharmacist at Fresenius for a couple of years. And so I beefed up all of my clinical work at Fresenius and died down what I did in a Walgreens. And then I died down a little bit more than what I did in my first industry role, because this was a nephrology role and I had nephrology experience. So I beefed that up all the way.
Amazing. Yeah, I would agree. Like 2 to 3 pages is great. I love the recommendation of a supplemental if you have other things that you'd like to include that could be pertinent. But again, ensure like, is this actually going to apply to the role and my success in this role if I were to land it? And I would view anything that you submit under that lens. And if you're like, perhaps not, then I would consider not doing it, especially if you're newer in your career too. I would not include things that you did like in pharmacy school or in your PhD, like solely once you've begun your role or begun your career. But again, like it has to be pertinent. Yeah.
It has to be pertinent. It has to be specific to what you're looking for.
And what they're looking for that matter.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next question is, how can PhDs without clinical experience position themselves on a resume to demonstrate readiness for an MSL role? I love this question because I've heard this question so many times, and again, I have strong feelings. Would love to hear your answer.
So I will say typically PhDs, of course, you did your dissertation in something very specific. I would try to land my first industry role in exactly what you did your PhD in. If you did it in microbiotics or you did it in immunology and you did some rat study or some cat study or whatever the study may be in immunology and in immunogenicity, then I would look for a company that is very strong in biologics. That's what I would do. If you did something in healthcare, if you did something in HIV, I would only start applying to HIV companies. And so that's where I would start because that's what you're strong in. If you're a little bit more fluid and it may not be as specific, it really does depend on what you got your PhD in, is the type of role that you may get. If you don't have a specific clinical PhD, then you may kind of lend yourself into psychoms, which is a great way to get into industry. Don't get
scientific communications. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Scientific communication. That is an excellent way to transition into industry if you don't have any direct clinical patient experience and your PhD may not be in anything in the biologics or anything very specific when it comes to patient care. If it's something a little bit more general, I would definitely look into scientific communications, maybe medical writing. There's so many other avenues to get into industry that you can be a medical digital director, which I didn't even know even existed until today, that somebody was asking me about a medical digital director. I was like, that sounds like a cool job. I mean, it's combining AI and medicine and really just helping to shape the company's AI presence in medical affairs. I'm like, for somebody who is really fun, who really enjoys all that, that's a fun way to get in the industry. And then once you get in, that's when you kind of navigate and you see all the different roles and you're like, okay, I did this for a year and a half, don't necessarily care for it. You see another opening, you get an internal referral, you choose. I mean, I always tell people medical affairs is so fluid. Like we come, we go. For some people, it's scary. I know when somebody first told me that they have changed jobs, 5 times in the past 10 years, like you only stay with a company for like 2 years and you kind of move on. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I've been with the same company for 13. Did I age myself out? Did I do something wrong? But in medical affairs, you are always constantly trying to grow. And the only way you can grow is if you move from therapeutic area to therapeutic area. I've known some MSLs who've gone into sales because they was like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of the direct science. I kind of want to live a little bit of a different life. I don't want the huge territory that a medical affairs person has. They want to kind of stay a little bit more local, maybe hone in to the HCPs in their territory and be a little bit more focused on them and not trying to build out so much. You can go into marketing. I mean, and you can always come back. That's the beauty of it. If you don't like it, you can find another job. But you got yourself in the door. That's the key. Getting yourself in.
I would 100% agree with that. And I love that you brought up some of like the stepping stone options, because oftentimes like it can be very competitive, and you might see in a lot of the job descriptions that it says like, you know, we would prefer candidates that have 1 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years of MSL experience. If you ask me, I say every job description are suggestions. I don't care if it says required. I apply anyway. And I've gotten some crazy roles that like they would have never considered me otherwise because I had the guts to just apply. Like you have to, you know, what did they say? To like shoot your shot, right? Like you have to try, because you can't yourself deny, you know, you can't deny yourself the opportunity. But I mean, other people, like, it's just like they're just trying to figure it out too. So no one's, you know, saying that you suck if you don't get a job. Like no one's saying that. It's just you're not the right fit for that particular team at that particular moment. As were talking about before, what if they have a bunch of PharmDs already and they're like, we want someone super duper sciencey, PhD level. Hopefully they did their dissertation in this, and you'd be the right fit for that. So you'll beat out other PharmDs and other people that might even have MSL experience because they're looking for someone literally exactly like you. So always apply, even if you're like, I maybe fit 50% of those requirements or less, always apply. But again, apply in the way that we talked about with the pertinent experience, tailoring your resume, all that good stuff. Reach out to people on LinkedIn from the team, do all the things, but don't count yourself out. So that's the one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that like it really is going to depend on like what you are interested in, what the company is interested in. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that changes every day. It changes from the company may be interested in one thing, but your therapeutic area may be interested in something completely different.
Yes,
and you never know until you try.
Oh, the other thing that I was going to mention about that. So going back to some of the stepping stone careers. So because it is so competitive to get into, I love the idea and I recommend it to people all the time who've tried to apply to MSL roles for a while and they've been unsuccessful because they haven't found the right team and the right match. And it really is, again, all about that match. I would recommend scientific communications, which is what Danielle brought up already. Again, a lot of companies call this different things. It could be medical communications, scientific communications. There's also medical information roles. So these are what are considered medical affairs roles, but they're more in-house or internal versus external facing or field roles, which is what the MSL role is. So I would recommend that if you're looking for, you know, I love medical affairs. I want to, you know, maybe you're like, I want to be an MSL eventually, but this particular way of applying directly has not worked so far. Maybe you get some therapeutic area expertise because you're applying to a medical information role specifically in nephrology. And then you meet all the nephrology team, you meet the MSLs, and then you get that insider scoop on like, oh, so-and-so is leaving to, you know, a different company because, you know, they want to relocate and they want to explore the West Coast. There's all of a sudden an opportunity in your region. Let's say you live in the South, there's an opportunity for you to have a great role as an MSL, and they would consider you potentially over someone else just because you already have a bit of that therapeutic area expertise from that medical information role. And you're very familiar with the company already. So you can get that internal referral and be able to transition over to that role instead of them having to onboard someone completely brand new to the company. So there are a lot of pros in doing it that way. I would also say, let's say you start at, you know, company Y and you're like, you know, I'm a medical affairs person internally. I'm a medical information specialist, but I don't love the culture. You go to conferences on behalf of the company. That's your moment to network in person. Of course, you can also network on LinkedIn for free and all that good stuff too. But if you're going to a conference, that's your opportunity to meet other medical affairs professionals or MSLs at other companies. And because you already have this, like your door's been opened and you've stepped through the door and you're in pharma as this role, you can be like, okay, I know my next step. I want to be an MSL, but I don't want to be at this company. And so then you can start searching and speaking to people at different companies and evaluate what other cultures could potentially fit you better. And you can still make that transition, even if that first role is not exactly what you wanted.
And then too, I also would say there are other types of MSL roles. I was talking to somebody earlier and they had a very strong business acumen. What used to be like a pharmacy director. And I was like, have you ever thought about being a MOSL? And they were like, what is a MOSL? I was like, a medical outcome science liaison. I was like, that marries your business acumen with your scientific acumen, because you are the liaison between the company and the PBMs, or you're the liaison between other pharmacy directors. And that's a great, I mean, you already have the inside scoop. You know how to run a hospital pharmacy. You know how to talk to PBMs. You do it anyway. Why not get paid for it? There's an HEOR roles. I mean, there are also like community science liaisons, and we have liaisons who are contracted. And I always tell people too, do not discount some of those contract roles. It does seem a little scary at first to be on a contract role, but it does give you quite a bit insight into being an MSL, and then you may get hired on with the company that you were outsourced and contracted with.
I know quite a few people who started off as contractors, as MSLs, and they've transitioned to now be full-time roles. So think of that also as a stepping stone. You know, you can start that way, and then you can potentially transition to something full-time and not contract. Okay, amazing. We have another question that's come through. After submitting a resume, what does the hiring process look like? So I was actually going to ask you to detail this too, Danielle, especially for people who haven't gone through the process yet and they're newly applying. Would love to, hear how you would describe from, let's say we're submitting the application materials, we creepily message people on LinkedIn. Now, what's like the next step? What's going to happen?
So typically the next step is that you'll get a call from HR, and they will set up a meeting with the hiring manager. So you do a phone screen, essentially. The phone screen typically lasts between 30 to 45 minutes. They want to get a high-level overview of who you are, what your qualifications are, what do you know about the MSL role, if you've never been an MSL, or why you're transitioning basically from one company to the next. And then two, what do you know about this company and why this company, right? And so if that hiring manager gets a very good feel for you, then you potentially would go on to a panel interview. Now, every company is different. I have done a panel interview with everybody at one time. I have done a panel interview that lasted about 3 weeks, because each and every different person had their own time, or the only time they can meet was at this time on this day, and the next person can only meet on this time the next week. And then everybody came together a month later, and then they ask you all the same questions that they've asked you before on your individuals, and then you do a presentation essentially. Now the presentation varies from company to company. They may ask you to present on something that you are very familiar with, on an article that you pick. I've had some companies who have also picked the article for you and say, here's the article, you come up with a presentation lasting no more than 15 to 20 minutes. I've also had a company say, you better not give me more than 6 slides. So it can range from 6 slides up to 25. It definitely depends on the company and what their requirements are. So that can, be a whole range of things, unfortunately. But typically you always do a panel interview, which will include more likely than not the national director for the team. Then you'll have both hiring directors for East and West typically, and then you probably have somebody on the team as one of the team members in the room. And then you may have somebody from like SciComm or somebody else like that in the room. So it's typically about 4 to 5 people, and they'll talk to you for about an hour, and then they'll give you a 15-minute time to present.
Yes, absolutely. We have 2 questions that have come in we can answer them, I think, together. So the first one is, do you recommend reaching out to recruiters for your first role, number 1? And then the second one is, what contracting companies do you recommend in terms of like some of the contracting roles we were talking about?
So the last question, companies I recommend, it's whatever fits for you. I mean, your job is to get in the door. So
I think they're asking what contracting companies. So like the companies that are like
the names of them.
Yeah.
Oh, like Cineos would be one of them. IQVIA is one of them. Amplity is another one. Ooh, I know Cineos, Amplity, MSL. Gosh, there's a company. Was it MSL something? They contract out to. But those are the top three: Cineos, IQVIA, Amplity.
Those are the
Are
ones
the
I know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some other ones, but those will be your top three.
And then what about your opinion on reaching out to recruiters for your first role?
Absolutely. You need to get your name, you need to get your face out there, because they're the ones who are getting those new referrals for roles. And you want to make sure that if somebody at, Symbio gets uh, somebody who, a company calls them and wants to outsource and needs them to help recruit for a role, especially when it comes to a new hire, you want to be first on the list. So what I would do, and I have done this, and I used to do it a lot, is that when I was first starting, I sent recruiters a blurb about myself and say, hey, I just want to get a time on your calendar. I want to introduce myself, because if something comes across your desk, I want to be the first person that you think of. And so I would always ask for 10 to 15 minutes on their calendar, send them a short little blurb about yourself, what you're looking for, your strong therapeutic areas of interest. And if something were to come across, then they will contact you. And I would keep them in like rotation every 6 months, so twice a year. So it's not, you're not bugging them or anything like that, but you are making sure that you are fresh and top of mind. Because it's very clear, recruiters only get paid if you get the job. So they're only going to nominate you for a role they think that you're actually going to get. Because if they do all this work trying to get you into a role and you don't get the role, they don't get paid. So their job is to put you in a position where you would hopefully be successful.
And I like the idea too of maintaining that relationship with the recruiter. I know so many people that got their first role with a recruiter, and then after that, they've continued to maintain that relationship. And just as you mentioned, medical affairs is very fluid. And not only is it because people are looking to improve themselves, they're also looking to, improve their pay and quality of life, or maybe they want to experience a different therapeutic area or a different company. And so there are a lot of reasons why people might want to change. But I do think that having a recruiter in your back pocket who already knows you, who's already worked with you, who's already helped you get a job before, that's another relationship to continue fostering. And again, like, I love the 6-month check-in, because that makes so much sense. Like 6 months, like, hey, how's it going? Cool. Like, even when you have a job that you like, because if you're thinking about what's the next step in your career, you'll probably start, looking again at that like third check-in, like 18-month or 24-month check-in, to be like, hey, just like putting my feelers out there, is there anything going on, anything interesting? And, they'll also already know you, what you're looking for, what your compensation is, even at this role, to then be able to connect you with things that will work out for you and for them. And of course, like as Danielle mentioned, like they are wanting to put forth candidates that they think are going to be successful at getting this role, because it's not only the way they get paid, but it's also their reputation. So the more candidates they know that are awesome, and awesome for different reasons, the better and higher likelihood that you will be put forward for a role that is going to be a great fit for you. They want to get paid, but also their repertoire increases. So it literally helps them as much as it helps you, and vice versa.
Yep, because it makes them look good for their boss that they've placed so many candidates in the right role, and then those candidates were successful. And I still have a great relationship with several recruiters, and I get a phone call, and I say, hey, check in with me every March, April. And once you get in the industry, that'll make sense to everybody. When you get that March, April phone call, and you're like, okay, bonuses are done, evaluations are done. We need to see where we're going to move next. But yeah, I still get a phone call, and I'm like, I sometimes you take them, and sometimes you say, I'm happy where I am, and not looking to move anytime soon, but you always want to keep a great relationship. I mean, you just never know what may come up. That's literally how I got the role I am now. A recruiter called me and was like, you should really look into it. I was like, I was happy. I was very happy. I was not looking to switch and change, and I trusted her enough to take the call, and that's what led me to my role I am in now. So never know.
Amazing. Well, this has been such a great conversation, arguably one of the quickest hours of my life, because literally I just looked up and it's been 55 minutes already somehow. So what a great chat. And honestly, thank you so much for the great questions. So many of the questions echoed things that I wanted to ask Danielle to benefit the audience. So thank you so much for reading my mind. And I could just read them from the chat instead of my list. We love that. We have time for maybe one more question. If anyone wants to sneak in and give that one last question, we're happy to answer it. And then we will close out. Or maybe I'll ask the last question because I don't know how much time between people typing and everything. So, as we're closing out, what would your overarching advice be for, aspiring MSLs, regardless of their educational background, regardless of their therapeutic area of interest? What would your, number one tip be for someone who's trying to break in right now?
Network, network, network. That is the name of the game. You have the letters behind your name. That will never change. But your ability to connect to people is what's going to set you apart. It's what's going to get you the interviews. It's what's going to get you the role. And the genuineness of your conversation. That's what's going to help you land your first role. Because you already got the letters. We know you're smart. Everybody else is smart. What will set you apart is how you present yourself and how you're able to communicate in an effective way that your audience will go on the journey with you and lead to the same ending that you're requiring, that you ask them to go to. So that's one thing I will say. Once again, people forget what you say. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that's something I lead that at every interview that I have, that I do. And I hope that the genuineness of the conversations that I have with not only my providers or with the audience here is echoed, and that you guys feel the passion in my heart and the love for the role that I've been able to be a part of for the past couple of years. So networking, do not, y'all have my name on here. First rule of thought, I told y'all to network. If none of y'all don't include me on your LinkedIn profile, then you didn't listen to anything we just said.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely add both of us. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question here or there. If you want to learn more about, working with a coach or, enrolling in a program that can help catapult you into landing your first role, we have lots of services and programs at the MSL Academy. So you can find out more at www.themslacademy.com. Also, you can, slide into our DMs on LinkedIn and ask us anything there too. Alrighty, well, thank you so much to everyone who joined live. Another amazing session, another amazing guest. Thank you, Danielle, for your time. And we will, of course, have, our ongoing monthly session. So tune in for the next one.
Alrighty, thanks so much. Have a great evening. Bye.